That's all. I don't need anything else. But that's not true for most of us. Is it just being saved and not on our way to hell anymore, and God, helping us to the point that now we have a steady job, we do have some income coming in. Our marriages aren't, at war all the time. We actually have seasons of peace. That's not enough. We need to have more. And so, in the garden, Eve has everything she could possibly need to be happy. Everything. But the attack or the temptation was that what God had given her wasn't enough. That tree, the fruit that hung on that tree that belonged to God specifically, she had to have it. She had to have it. It's kind of like you and I, our neighbor, they get something and we become envious. So we have to get it. There's something about our fallen nature that we have to have what someone else has, or we're not happy. And she is told in the garden that if she eats the fruit, she will be as God. Think about that. Because you could run in so many different directions concerning that. But it may be that in her own mind, because God had created everything and God had made it so that she should have been happy, that somehow she took those words, "You'll be as God," and figured she could make her own happiness. Just like we do. I'll make my own little world. I'll insulate our lives, honey, and we're going to have our own pursuit of happiness. Outside of maybe what God has for us, we're going to be different. Maybe that's why some of us react the way that we do. So, one man said, many people have heard that joy means Jesus first, others next, and yourself last. But in a sermon, a preacher preached it differently. He said, the J stands for Jesus, the Y stands for you. Do you know what O stands for? It stands for zero. Just what it says. Nothing. What I am saying here is the way to stay close to Jesus and keep joy in your heart is let nothing come between Jesus and you. Don't you remember when you first got saved? He was all we needed. I didn't need anything else. Which brings me to the conclusion and the truth about kingdom joy. Because kingdom joy is deep. It's not superficial. When I say superficial, it's not like what the world defines joy to be. This misunderstanding is what gets us in trouble. Again, we think inanimate objects, careers, people are going to make us happy. They're not. They never have been able to. If you got married and you thought that the person you married was going to make you happy, you already know that that was not true. They can't make you happy. I don't have anything in me to make my wife happy. To have her experience the joy that she desperately needs. And you don't have it either for your spouse. And they don't have it for you. That's why in many marriages, they're just surviving together. They grow apart from each other because they begin to have interests outside of each other's sphere. See, we constantly tend to associate happiness or joy with happenings. With happenings. Isn't it interesting, kids get all fired up because you're planning a trip to maybe take them to Disneyland, or you're planning a trip to the mountains, and the kids are all, oh man, it's going to be a great time, and what have you. And maybe you do, and you experience for a moment, for a few days, an element or a degree of happiness. So we define. We come home, and everything that we left, all of our problems and boredom is waiting for us. I used to have a dog. I don't like pets, but somehow my wife was able to convince me. Snuck that animal in, and that dog, for whatever reason, maybe he figured the only way he was going to survive without being killed was to make friends with me. So there are times, there I am, I'm driving down the road, he's riding shotgun. And times he'll just kind of creep over and get over here on this side. He'll put his head out the window, stick out his tongue, let the saliva slap the person behind us, in their windshield. And so, he'd do that, and we'd take off, and sometimes, I'd have to leave him home, and that was good. I needed a break from him. But this dog, and all pets are probably the exact same way. As soon as they heard the car drive up, he's right there. He's looking out the window, and then he runs to the door. He's barking, and I come in. He's jumping, and he wants to get up into my arms and what have you. That's the way our problems are. Is that we may have a great time. We went to Disneyland, we went to the mountains, we went to Vegas, whatever you did. But when you came home, it's like everything that you left behind, that you ran away from, they're waiting. They're like that dog with their tongue sticking out. Can't wait for you to come through the door to pounce on you. And so the joy, the abundant life that Jesus talks about has to be deeper than what you and I experience. Deeper than the eye can see. Isaiah chapter 12, verse 3. It says, with joy shall ye draw water out of the wells of salvation. With joy. You're going to draw water out of the wells of salvation. Now, wells tonight, they're dug pretty deep. Wells are not like, this puddle of water, just on the surface. No, people who dug these wells took the time to dig deeply and to tap into the water that's there under the ground. It's several feet down. And Jesus connects, or God connects joy with a well. And he's saying to you and I that joy, the joy of the kingdom, is deeper than what you and I experience just going to a movie or going to an amusement park or just having one day outing. It's deeper than that. And yet we try to settle for the superficial, yuckity yuck yuck happiness that the world runs after. Wells aren't only deep, they're pretty well insulated. They're made on purpose that way. And one of the things about a well is that it doesn't matter what's going on outside on the surface. It could be windy, it could be extremely harsh weather, very hot. But when you dip into that well and you bring up that water, it's cool. Because what's happening on the outside, what's happening on the surface, does not affect the well. And that's what God is saying, that the joy of the kingdom is not only deep, it has nothing to do with the environment, it has nothing to do with you and I are experiencing on the surface. We need to remember that. See, the kingdom joy comes from only one place. And it comes from God, our relationship with Christ, and what God's doing in our life through the Holy Spirit. Galatians 5:22 says that one of the fruits of the Spirit is joy. Then when God is working in my life and He's working in your life, that it's going to produce this type of joy. So maybe, just maybe, if we're not experiencing kingdom joy, maybe it's because we're not allowing God to really do some deep work in us. That's a possibility. You see, that's exactly when I got saved, I'm talking about someone that was unhappy with life. That's me. I had come to a place where I was tired of everything. Again, I had tried just about every drug. I didn't do heroin because I saw what it did to my friends. But every other drug that I could consume, I did it. And everything that the world said to do to find happiness, I jumped into it. I experienced, I piled it on my plate and came to a place where I was frustrated and so unhappy with my life. And then Jesus came into my heart. And all of a sudden, I returned to work and I got joy. I mean, you're talking about someone that always had, this mean look and always, made other people uncomfortable. Because I was so unhappy, I was going to make sure everybody else was unhappy as well. It's like that cartoon strip, Peanuts, and here's Pigpen. That's me. And I came into the room and I could change the atmosphere in a room just by walking in. This cloud of dust, cloud of unhappiness and hatred and stuff. But I'm saved now. And so things are different. I'm greeting people, as I walk by them. I'm not just simply walking by them and ignoring them. I'm saying, hello, good morning, how are you? They're having a hard day. To them, every day of the week is Monday. They don't want to be there. But for some reason, I want to be there. I'm pushing. I couldn't get into the nursing positions yet because they were filled. So I took a job as a janitor in the hospital. I'm pushing garbage around, and I'm singing the songs of the church. I learned them. They're looking at me like I'm crazy. I was crazy before. See, that word joy that Paul talks about in Galatians 5, verse 22, is the word chara in the Greek. And it means to be cheerful. It means cheerfulness, gladness, and calm. It doesn't mean, that because we got joy, we've got these cheese-eating grin on our face. We're like the Joker. And just, we're uncontrollably, just constantly laughing and giggling. That's not joy. Okay? I don't know what that is, but that's not joy. And so in the midst of what we're going through, in the midst of our problems, there can be a calmness. That's what joy is, calm. We're not freaking out. We're not pulling our hair out, Well, everybody else might be. Right? In this time of pandemic and people are scared. If you got joy, there's a calm. Are you listening? And the Y2K scare, 2000, my gosh, the world's going to come to an end. The computers, the clocks, they can't go beyond that, and on and on and on. And people are freaking out. Churches are freaking out. They're stocking up their prayer room with water and cans of food and this and that, because they're freaking out. The world's coming to an end. But it didn't. It didn't. And our fellowship wasn't freaking out. Because it was a joy that only God can bring. Psalms 126, verse 5. They that sow in tears shall reap in joy. That there's something about being in a calamitous situation. There's something about experiencing heartache and what have you. Things aren't working out, that we labor and labor, see no fruit, and maybe come to points like I talked about, frustration and tears straining down our eyes. But there comes a change. There's a Spirit of God that comes upon you. God begins to remind you, and out of the wells of salvation, the wells that have been stored up, the wells that have been dug by you and I, that out of those things comes joy. Out of those things comes this calmness. This reassurance. We reap in joy. But this also involves something else, and I close with this final small thought. And that is that you and I, as God's people, we choose to align our life with the will of God. God, I don't know why I'm going through this. Doesn't make any sense to me. It's not what I would have chosen for me, but I trust you. And if this is what you want for my life, then so be it. This involves you and I being in His presence. Okay? This is a reminder that we should pray. We should pray every day. And I'm not talking about praying for your food. Okay. But taking some time on a daily basis to pray, to get a hold of God, to be in His presence. Psalm 16:11, in God's presence is fullness of joy. There's that word again. One final thing was in Habakkuk in chapter 3. Habakkuk is living in a time of great famine. He's talking about things that are happening around him, things that he sees, things he's experiencing. And in verse 17 and 18, he says, even though the trees aren't blossoming, and even though there are no grapes on the vines, even though the fields are barren, he says, I will be joyful. That the joy of the kingdom has nothing to do with you and I, with what you and I are experiencing on the outward. See, when I got saved, I still had the same problems. I dumped all my money in trying to live like everybody else, I got out of the military, and so I'm going to live like everybody else, and I'm going to get into this house that I can't afford, but I've got an image to uphold. And so I've got this large three-bedroom house and a two-car garage. I've got a den as well as a living room. In my den, I've got a fireplace. Oh, man, this is a great place. But I can't afford it. But I don't care, because I have an image to uphold. I've got my lowrider. I've got it dropped. I've got my rims on. I've got my small chain steering wheel so that if they handcuff me, I can still steer in my breakaway. I've got the latest equipment in my car, stereo, all that. But I'm beyond my ability to take care of the needs that my family has, because I spend my money crazily. When I got saved, those problems were still there. God didn't wipe the debt clean. As a new convert, I went to my pastor, sat in his kitchen table, we're talking, and I said, I need something. I need a miracle. I need God to help me. It's okay, let's sit down. So let's put all your debt on in black and white. Put it on a piece of paper. So how much do you make? What are you bringing in? This and that. Okay, what are you paying out? So we're figuring it all out. It's all on black and white. You can see exactly where I am financially. He gets up from the table, walks over, pours himself another cup of coffee, turns around and says, John, you really need a miracle. Because it doesn't matter. We can do math, but there's no math that's going to get you out of this. You need a miracle. So God didn't change that. God didn't change my wife. She still thought I was a jerk. And she was right. To a degree. I had just got saved. And it took a while. But in the midst of all of that, I made a decision. I'm going to be happy. You can do that. You can change your attitude. You know that old saying that, you can be arguing with your wife and the car, the cop pulls you over because you ran a red light or you ran a stop sign. You didn't notice because you're too busy arguing, yelling at your wife. And so you pull over and then the cop comes up to the window and you just got through, calling her a witch and everything. You lower the window down and you say, how can I help you, officer? You changed your attitude. The circumstances didn't change. You did. And that's exactly what we can do in the kingdom, to experience kingdom joy. Change our attitude, be in the presence of God, and leave everything with Him. Let's bow our heads. Heads are bowed, eyes are closed.